In the fall of 2021, I had just moved into a new apartment in Phoenix. It was my first time living alone, and my budget was tight, so I turned to Craigslist to furnish my place. I wasn't looking for anything fancy, just the basics. One night, while scrolling through listings, I saw a post that caught my eye. Free couch, must pick up tonight. It was simple, almost too good to be true. The photos showed a clean, dark gray couch, modern-looking, in great condition. The listing had no long description, just a phone number. The guy who answered said his name was Greg. He told me he was moving the next morning and needed it gone by midnight. He sounded normal, even friendly, so I agreed to pick it up. He gave me the address, a house in a quiet neighborhood about 20 minutes away. When I arrived, the street was dark, barely lit by old streetlights. The house itself looked abandoned, overgrown lawn, windows covered in dust, no car in the driveway. I double-checked the address, hesitating before texting Greg that I was there. Seconds later, the porch light flickered on. The front door opened, but no one stepped out. My stomach tightened. I got out of my car, slowly glancing around. Everything about the house felt wrong, like it had been untouched for years. Yet the light was on, and the door was open. I forced myself forward, stepping onto the creaking porch. Peering inside, I saw the couch sitting in the middle of an otherwise empty living room. No decorations, no furniture, just the couch. Greg finally appeared from a hallway, wiping his hands on a rag. He was tall, mid-40s, dressed in old jeans and a wrinkled t-shirt. He gave me a polite nod and gestured toward the couch, saying I could take it if I wanted. His voice was calm, but something about his eyes unsettled me. They didn't match his friendly tone. They looked tired. I asked if he needed help moving it outside, but he shook his head quickly, almost too quickly, saying I could just drag it myself. His hands were shaking. An uneasy feeling settled in my gut. I grabbed one end of the couch, but as I started to move it, a sound made my breath catch. A dull thud. It came from inside the couch. I froze. Greg's face paled slightly, but he forced a tight smile, telling me not to worry about it. I let go, pretending to adjust my grip, and subtly pushed down on one of the cushions. Another thud. Something was inside. My chest tightened. I mumbled an excuse, saying I needed to grab my phone from my car, and backed toward the door. Greg didn't stop me, didn't move. He just stood there, watching. The moment I stepped outside, I ran. I didn't look back, didn't stop until I was in my car, doors locked, engine roaring to life. My hands were shaking as I sped away, my mind racing with possibilities. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just escaped something. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. Curiosity gnawed at me, so I searched the address online. What I found made my blood run cold. The house had been vacant for 3 years. Greg didn't own it. The next morning, I called the police, reporting what had happened. They told me they'd check it out, but I never heard back. I kept searching online, trying to find anything, but the Craigslist post had been deleted. The number I had called was disconnected. A week later, I saw another Craigslist listing. Free couch. Must pick up tonight. Different city. Same photos. Same couch. And I still wonder, if I had taken it home, if I had unzipped the cushions, what would I have found? Or worse, who? In the winter of 2022, I was desperate for a new job. I had just moved to Denver, barely scraping by with part-time work. So when I saw a Craigslist listing for an overnight warehouse assistant, I jumped on it. The ad was simple. Light inventory work. Cash paid daily, no experience needed. The best part? $25 an hour. way more than anything else I had found. I emailed the contact and got a reply within minutes. The guy, who introduced himself as Tom, told me to come in for an immediate trial shift that night. The warehouse was on the outskirts of the city, past a row of abandoned buildings. It wasn't in an industrial park or part of any big company, just a lone structure, sitting in the dark. The address matched, but there was no business sign, just a faded for-lease banner hanging lopsided near the entrance. That should have been my first red flag, but the thought of easy money overpowered my hesitation. I parked and walked to the entrance, noticing the chain lock hanging loosely on the gate. Someone had unlocked it recently. As I stepped inside, the air smelled stale, like dust and something metallic. A single overhead light flickered in the distance, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Tom was already inside, waiting near a rusted desk. He was in his 50s, tall but wiry, his clothes slightly oversized like they belonged to someone else. He greeted me with a handshake, his grip too tight, his hands too cold. He barely made eye contact, muttering something about how the boss wasn't around but had left instructions for my shift. I asked about paperwork, a contract, anything official, but he brushed it off, saying I could fill it out after my trial shift. The job seemed simple. I was supposed to move sealed boxes from one side of the warehouse to another. No labels, no markings. The boxes weren't heavy, but something about them felt off. The weight inside shifted unnaturally, like whatever was inside wasn't packed properly. I asked what was in them, trying to sound casual. Tom stopped moving. For the first time, he looked directly at me. His lips twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile. He just said, "Don't worry about that." Every instinct screamed at me to leave. But I had already driven all the way out there, and my bank account was nearly empty. I told myself I'd stick it out for an hour, grab my pay, and never come back. As I stacked the first set of boxes, I noticed something. The ones at the bottom were wet. A thick, dark stain had seeped through the cardboard, pooling onto the floor beneath them. My stomach turned. It wasn't water. I forced myself to stay calm, stealing a glance at Tom. He wasn't watching me anymore. He was staring toward the far end of the warehouse, where the shadows swallowed the corners. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. "We should hurry. It wakes up if we're too loud." I dropped the box in my hands. It landed with a dull squelching sound. I backed away, heart pounding, trying to process what I had just heard. Tom finally turned back to me, his face eerily blank. He wasn't joking. I forced a laugh, pretending I wasn't shaken. I asked if I could use the bathroom, needing any excuse to step away. Tom gestured toward a side door without a word. As soon as I was out of his sight, I pulled out my phone. No service. Not even a single bar. The air inside the warehouse felt thicker now, like the walls themselves were breathing. I needed to get out. I cracked the bathroom door open slightly, peeking back into the warehouse. Tom was gone. The boxes I had stacked were now unstacked. The far end of the warehouse was darker than before. I could barely make out the shape of something moving, slow, unnatural, stretching. A low, wet gurgling sound filled the air, rising from the far end of the room. It wasn't human. My body locked up, every nerve screaming at me to run. But as I turned, a hand shot through the crack in the door, gripping my arm too tightly. Tom. His face was inches from mine now, eyes wide and unnatural, like something inside him wasn't entirely human. His lips parted, his breath reeking of something rancid. He whispered, voice trembling, "You shouldn't have come." Adrenaline took over. I ripped free from his grip, shoving him hard enough to send him stumbling backward. I bolted for the main entrance, my shoes slipping on the damp floor. Behind me, I heard something dragging itself across the concrete, faster now. The moment I hit the gate, I threw it open and ran to my car. My hands fumbled with the keys, nearly dropping them. Just as the engine roared to life, I dared one last glance toward the warehouse. Tom was standing in the doorway, smiling, and behind him, in the shadows, something else was smiling too. I never went back, never reported it. The Craigslist ad was gone the next day, wiped from the site like it had never existed. Weeks later, I saw a news article about an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Police had found dozens of empty boxes inside, each one stained with something dark. They never identified who had been working there, or what had been inside those boxes. In the summer of 2023, I was searching for a cheap place to live in Boston. Rent was insane, and I was desperate, so when I found a Craigslist listing for a basement studio, utilities included, no lease required, cash only, I didn't ask too many questions. The pictures were decent, showing a small but clean space, and the price was unbeatable. The landlord, a man named Mr. Beckett, responded almost immediately to my inquiry, saying the unit was available that week. He didn't ask for much, just first month's rent and a move-in date. That should have been a red flag, but at the time, I didn't care. When I arrived to see the place, the house looked normal enough. A typical New England-style building, old but well-kept, sitting at the end of a quiet street. Mr. Beckett was waiting for me outside. He was in his 60s, thin, wearing a button-up shirt tucked neatly into slacks. He didn't say much, just nodded and led me around the side of the house to a narrow, gated entrance. The basement door was old, almost too old compared to the rest of the house, with a heavy iron handle. The second we stepped inside, I noticed how cold it was. Not just cool from being underground, unnaturally cold. The space itself was bare, but livable. A small kitchenette, a mattress on a metal frame, a tiny bathroom. No windows, but for the price, I convinced myself I could deal with it. I told Mr. Beckett I'd take it. He gave me a thin smile, handed me a single old-fashioned key, and told me two things. 1. Never go through the second door in the back of the apartment. 2. If I ever heard noises at night, I should ignore them. I laughed, thinking it was some weird joke, but he didn't. His eyes didn't blink when he said it. I should have walked away right then. My first night in the apartment, I felt off. Even with the door locked, the space felt too open, like something unseen was watching. The air was stale, carrying a faint metallic scent I couldn't place. Still, I convinced myself it was just nerves. That night, I woke up freezing. My blanket had been pulled off me, lying in a heap on the floor. My skin was ice cold, my breath visible. I sat up, rubbing my arms, when I noticed something wrong. The back door, the one I wasn't supposed to touch, was slightly open. My chest tightened. I knew for a fact that it had been shut. I told myself the old house must have shifted, that maybe it didn't latch properly. But deep down, I knew that was a lie. I got up slowly, heart pounding, and pushed the door shut without looking inside. I didn't want to see what was beyond it. The next morning, I called Mr. Beckett. He didn't answer. I left a message asking about the back room, trying to keep my voice casual. He never called back. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt something shift in the air. Then I heard it. A slow, rasping breath. Not from my room, not from the hallway. From the other side of that door, my entire body locked up. The breathing was slow, uneven, wet. Something was behind that door, just standing there, listening. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. I don't know how long I lay there, waiting, heart hammering so hard I thought it might explode. And then, As suddenly as it started, it stopped. The air felt lighter, like whatever had been there had stepped away. I didn't sleep after that. The next morning, I decided I needed to know what was behind that door. I searched online for any records of the house, any history that might explain what was going on. What I found made my stomach drop. Decades ago, the house had belonged to a surgeon. He had rented out the basement apartment to struggling medical students. Over time, several of them vanished. No bodies, no explanations, just gone. Neighbors reported hearing strange noises from the basement late at night, but nothing was ever proven. The surgeon eventually moved away, and the house was sold. But that wasn't the worst part. One article mentioned a hidden room in the basement, a private operating space. I knew then. That's what was behind the door. I packed my things that same day, stuffing everything I owned into my car as fast as I could. I didn't even wait for Mr. Beckett to show up. I just left. But as I reached the door to leave, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You opened it, didn't you?" I ran. I never looked back. Days later, I searched the listing again, half expecting it to be gone. But it wasn't. It was still there, still advertising a cheap basement apartment, cash only, no lease required. Same price, same pictures, same description. The only thing that changed? The phone number. Craigslist can be a great place to find deals, jobs, or a cheap place to stay. But sometimes the price you pay isn't just money. A free couch that hides something disturbing. A job that leads to something inhuman, or a basement apartment with a door that should never be opened. Some listings should stay unanswered. If these stories gave you chills, make sure to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more real horror stories. And don't forget to hit the bell icon, because the next time you browse online, you might not be the only one watching.